They said he was just a joke. Another overhyped regional fighter riding a wave of online buzz and empty promises. A year ago, if you mentioned Paddy Pimblett in serious UFC conversations, you'd be laughed out of the room. But today, nobody's laughing. Today, those same critics hold their breath every time he steps into the octagon. What changed? How did this cheerful, shaggy-haired scouser go from comic relief to a nightmare that keeps elite fighters up at night? This is the story of that transformation, not just of a fighter, but of a movement. The scary reality of facing Paddy Pimblett starts now. He walks into every arena like it's his home, even when it's not, smiling, dancing, cracking jokes. But behind that grin is something else, something far more lethal than his left hook or rear naked choke. It's belief, not blind confidence, but unwavering conviction that no matter who stands across from him, no matter how brutal the challenge, he's walking out the winner. It's unnerving, because most fighters need fire to win. Paddy, he brings fun, and that's what makes him terrifying. Because if he's smiling while he's breaking you, what does that say about the pain he's capable of dishing out? The UFC didn't see him coming. Not really. Sure, they saw the social media buzz, the cheeky accent, the Liverpudlian flair, but they didn't see this Paddy coming. The one who could take a punch, laugh it off, and choke you out 10 seconds later. The one who used his debut to end a man's UFC career with one brutal exchange. The one who had every reason to fold under pressure and didn't. And by the time they realized it, it was too late. Paddy wasn't knocking on the door of the lightweight elite. He was kicking it off its hinges. Most fighters have a nickname. Paddy has a persona. Paddy the Baddy. But that's not just a gimmick. It's a Trojan horse. While you're caught up laughing at the haircut, the accent, the dance moves, he's analyzing, measuring your tempo, testing your reactions. And when it's time, he explodes. It's psychological warfare disguised as entertainment. And it works, because by the time his opponent realizes the danger, they're already on the canvas, staring at the ceiling, wondering what just happened. That's not just fighting, that's manipulation. That's fear as a weapon. But make no mistake, this isn't a fluke. Paddy's rise is as calculated as it is explosive. Behind the theatrics is a fighter forged in fire, cage warriors champion, ground game like a python, striking that's improving every fight. But more than that, a mental game that would break most seasoned veterans. He doesn't just fight opponents, he dismantles their belief. And belief is everything in this game. Take that away and the rest crumbles. Paddy doesn't have to talk trash. He just has to show up. Because when he does, the crowd does too. And they bring a storm. Step into the cage with him, and it's not just a fight, it's a spectacle. The fans don't cheer, they roar. Every jab gets amplified. Every takedown echoes like a gunshot. And if you're the one facing him, it feels like the whole world wants you to fail. That kind of pressure breaks people. It broke Jared Gordon, a solid, experienced fighter. But against Paddy, under those lights in that atmosphere, he unraveled. Not from punches, but from presence. That's Paddy's greatest weapon. You don't just fight him, you fight the crowd, the expectation, the myth. And myths are hard to kill, especially when they're built on real pain. Paddy's fight against Jordan Levitt wasn't just another matchup. It was a war waged with heartbreak in his corner. Days before he buried his best friend, who took his own life. Most people would crumble under that kind of weight. Paddy carried it into the cage, and he didn't just win, he conquered. His post-fight words were raw, human, unforgettable. That night, Paddy didn't just gain fans, he gained family. He became more than a fighter, he became a symbol. And symbols don't fade easily. You see, Paddy's not just fighting for himself, he's fighting for something bigger. For every kid who's ever felt overlooked. For every underdog who's ever been laughed at. For every man too afraid to talk about his demons. He wears his pain like armor and turns it into power. And when he speaks, people listen, not because he's loud, but because he's real. In a sport overflowing with personas and pretenders, Paddy Pimblett is painfully, refreshingly honest. And that honesty cuts deeper than any elbow ever could. That's why people fear him. Not just because of what he can do physically, but what he represents emotionally. You can prepare for a striker. You can study a grappler. But how do you train for someone who's fueled by grief, carried by love, and lifted by millions? How do you strategize against someone who turns every setback into momentum? You don't. You hope. You hope he has an off night. You hope the crowd isn't too loud. You hope you can stay focused. But deep down, he's already got the edge. Because Paddy doesn't come alone. He brings a movement. And movements don't fade quietly. They grow. They evolve. They adapt. Just like Paddy. He's not the same fighter he was last year. He's sharper, faster, smarter. Every opponent is a lesson. Every round is a classroom. And while the world watches to see if he'll break, Paddy's learning how to bend. He's studying the game in real time, and with every victory, he gets closer to something dangerous. Not just fame, not just belts, but inevitability. Because sooner or later, the division won't be able to ignore him. And when that day comes, the lightweight elite will have to face the reality they've been avoiding. They called Tony Ferguson the boogeyman for a reason. At his peak, he was untouchable, a tornado of elbows, pressure, and chaos. He didn't just win fights, he ruined men. Legends like Cowboy Cerrone were left broken, their faces carved up like steak tartare. And even in decline, Ferguson carried an aura, a warning. You don't walk through Tony, you survive him if you're lucky. So when the UFC paired him with Paddy, it wasn't just a fight, it was a test, a statement. Could the smiling Scouser handle the darkness that still lingered in Tony's eyes? Everyone had an opinion. Some said Paddy was being thrown to the wolves, that he wasn't ready for the deep waters. Others believed it was a mercy bout for Ferguson, a chance to reclaim his place by snapping his losing streak. But what neither side realized was this. It wasn't just about physical readiness. It was about mental warfare. Ferguson fights with madness. But Paddy fights with meaning, the kind of meaning that turns fear into fuel. And when those two energies collided, it didn't matter who was older or hungrier. It mattered who could handle the moment. The lead-up was chaos. Verbal jabs, Instagram drama, energy-charged pressers. Tony, desperate to reclaim relevance, poked at Paddy's persona, called him soft, said the fans only liked him because of the accent, the flair. Paddy, he brushed it off with the casual cool of a man who's been underestimated his whole life. He didn't need to scream. He didn't need to fight online. He just needed the cage. Because in that locked octagon, all the noise gets silenced. And that's where Paddy thrives. In the quiet between the chaos, where fists talk louder than words. Fight night was a masterclass in controlled emotion. Tony came out swinging, like the old days. Wild, dangerous, unpredictable. For a moment, it looked like Paddy might drown in the storm. But he didn't flinch. He adapted, dodged the traps, read the patterns. And when the timing was right, he struck. A clean 1-2. Lightning fast, accurate. It wasn't just a hit. It was a declaration that this wasn't luck. This wasn't hype. This was evolution. Paddy Pimblett was not here to play. He was here to take everything. What made that win terrifying wasn't just the result, it was the composure. Against a man who had once reigned supreme in the most brutal division of the sport, Paddy never lost his cool. While Tony spiraled into desperation, Paddy stayed surgical, calm, cold, calculated. And when the bell rang, it wasn't just the crowd that stood in awe, it was the division. Because suddenly, this wasn't a fluke. This was real. Paddy Pimblett had dismantled a legend, and he did it without breaking a sweat. But let's be honest, Ferguson was fading. Critics said the win didn't mean much, that Tony wasn't the same fighter he used to be, and maybe they're right. But here's the thing they're missing. It's not about beating a prime version of someone. It's about rising when the lights are brightest. It's about doing what you're supposed to do, and more, when the pressure is unbearable. That night wasn't just about Tony. It was about Paddy proving he belongs in the conversation. Not as a sideshow, not as a social media darling, but as a legitimate threat. And that threat grows every day, with every fight, every promo, every fan he adds to his army. Paddy isn't just building a career. He's building a legacy, a reputation, one that walks into the Octagon 10 minutes before him, one that makes seasoned fighters hesitate, because it's not just about technique anymore, it's about presence. Paddy brings the kind of energy that drains your confidence before the first punch is thrown. And once doubt creeps in, the fight's already halfway over. That's the scary reality. Paddy Pimblett isn't the best striker in the division. He's not the strongest grappler. But what he lacks in traditional dominance, he makes up for in psychology, in pressure, in performance. Fighting Paddy is like fighting gravity. You can try to resist, but the weight eventually pulls you down. And by the time you realize you're trapped, it's too late. He's already wrapped around you, squeezing, smiling, celebrating, because he knows something you don't. He's been here before, and he's not going anywhere. There's a reason the UFC keeps putting him on main cards even before he cracks the top 10. There's a reason fans chant his name before he even enters the arena. Paddy draws eyes, but more importantly, he delivers moments. That's what makes him dangerous. The greats aren't remembered for stats. They're remembered for stories, comebacks, chaos, iconic lines, and unforgettable finishes. And Paddy, he's writing a new chapter every time he steps inside that cage. One bloody, brilliant paragraph at a time. And here's the kicker. He's only just getting started. The story isn't finished, not even close. If anything, it's just reaching its second act. The challenges ahead will be tougher, the competition sharper. But so is Paddy. He's growing faster than his haters can talk, learning quicker than the division can adjust. And if you think what we've seen so far is the peak, you haven't been paying attention. Because Paddy Pimblett doesn't peak. He ascends, one fight, one roar, one moment at a time. There's a moment before every fight, right after the doors lock, right before the bell rings, where silence takes over. And in that pause, you see it, the fear, not the kind that comes from physical pain. Fighters live with pain. They expect it. No, this is deeper, existential, the kind of fear that whispers, what if I'm not enough? And when you're standing across from Paddy Pimblett, that whisper turns into a scream. Because with him, it's not just the fight, it's the moment, the pressure, the crowd, the possibility that you'll be a footnote in someone else's legend. And that's exactly what's happening. Paddy's not just winning fights, he's making moments. He's taking names, yes, but more importantly, he's writing stories. Ones that fans remember, that media eats up, that future opponents study with concern. Because even if you land the first punch, even if you rock him, he smiles. He waves it off. And that smile, that's a signal. It says, you haven't broken me, but I'm about to break you. And if you're not ready for that kind of psychological warfare, you're already 3 rounds behind. His charisma is deceptive. It disarms, makes you think he's unserious, a showman. And he is, until the cage door closes. Then the transformation is immediate. The fun fades, the eyes sharpen, the energy shifts. Paddy becomes something else. Not angry, not wild, but focused, ice cold. And that's what separates him from the pack. Because most fighters need rage to push them. Paddy, he thrives in the calm, that eerie stillness before he strikes. It's not just skill, it's instinct. A predator dressed as a prankster. The fans know it too. That's why they love him. Not just because of the walkouts or the accent, but because he feels real, flawed, human. He talks about his struggles, his mental health, his grief. He doesn't hide from pain. He makes it public. And in doing so, he gives his fans permission to feel, to be vulnerable, to heal. That's why they chant his name. That's why they cry with him. Because Paddy doesn't pretend to be a superhero. He's a survivor. And in a sport defined by violence, his vulnerability is revolutionary. You can't game plan for that. There's no tape that prepares you for the weight of 1 million fans, all screaming against you. No sparring session that simulates the pressure of carrying your legacy into an octagon that suddenly feels 10 degrees hotter. Paddy makes you fight on his terms, on his turf, even when you're in your own country. Because when he walks in, the dynamic shifts. The crowd leans his way, the spotlight follows him. You become the villain by default, and fighting as the villain, that's a lonely place. But the wildest part? He still hasn't hit his ceiling. He's still refining his game, tightening his defense, sharpening his transitions, learning from every exchange. Every fight, win or lose, becomes part of his evolution. And that's what makes the future so terrifying for the division. Because Paddy's not plateauing, he's building, piece by piece, like a storm gathering over calm seas. You don't see it until it's right over you, and by then, it's too late. His ground game already feels like drowning. Once he takes your back, it's a countdown, not if, but when. And even if you survive the submission attempt, the scramble that follows leaves you gasping. Because Paddy doesn't need to win every moment. He just needs one opening, one lapse, one mistake, and he turns it into highlight gold. That's the danger. He doesn't just win, he makes it unforgettable. And in this sport, that kind of memory is currency. Opponents try to stay composed, but you can see it in their eyes. Hesitation. It starts during walkouts, builds during introductions, peaks at the first exchange. They feel the pace, the weight, the eyes. And it messes with their rhythm. They throw half a beat too late or too early. They second-guess their shots. And in those microseconds, Paddy takes over. The lightweight division doesn't know what to do with him yet. They see the holes in his game. They tell themselves he's beatable. But deep down, they feel the tide changing. And the scariest thing about tides? You don't stop them. You ride them or get swallowed. Paddy Pimblett is rising. And whether the elite want to admit it or not, they're going to have to deal with him sooner than they think. There's a reason legends are born in chaos. They don't emerge when things are comfortable. They rise in the middle of storms. When the lights blind, the noise deafens, and every step forward feels like walking a tightrope with knives below. That's where Paddy thrives. The chaos is his comfort zone. He's not just used to it, he creates it. And in that swirling madness, while others break or bend, Paddy becomes sharper, faster, more dangerous. That's not hype, that's history in motion. And history remembers the disruptors, the ones who refuse to wait their turn. Paddy's not asking for permission. He's not waiting for handouts. He's kicking down doors. Every call out, every stare down, every comeback is a challenge thrown at the old guard. He's telling the division, adapt or be replaced, and they know it. Even if they won't say it out loud, the whispers are growing louder. The matchmakers are taking notice. The fans, they've already decided. Paddy's not just part of the lightweight story, he's becoming the headline. That's what makes him more than a prospect. He's a problem that can no longer be ignored. You can break down his film, you can analyze his mistakes, but what you can't measure is momentum. And Paddy has it, not just with the fans, not just with the UFC, but with destiny. Every fighter who's gone from cult favorite to contender had to face this crossroads. And Paddy, he's sprinting through it, eyes forward, no hesitation, no breaks. But with great momentum comes greater danger. Every fighter gunning for him now wants more than a win. They want a scalp. They want to be the one who stops the hype train, who silences the roar. And that makes every fight more perilous. Because Paddy's not just fighting skilled athletes anymore. He's fighting assassins with nothing to lose and everything to gain. That pressure, it breaks most. But for Paddy, it's oxygen. He breathes it in, turns it into fire. You can see it in the way he trains. The intensity, the discipline. Behind the laughs and the swagger is a man obsessed. He knows what's coming. He knows the target on his back is glowing brighter every day. But he also knows what lies ahead. Title shots, legacy fights, superstardom, and he's not shying away. He's running headfirst into the flame. Because that's where the greats are forged, in the inferno. And Paddy, he's just heating up. But the question lingers. What happens when he finally meets someone who doesn't break? Who doesn't crack under pressure? Who welcomes the noise, the chaos, and hits back just as hard? What happens when Paddy is truly pushed to his limit? Not just physically, but spiritually. That's the fight fans are waiting for. That's the proving ground. And when it comes, one thing's for sure, it won't be quiet. Because Paddy doesn't do quiet. He doesn't sneak into history. He storms into it, fireworks blazing, Fans chanting, hearts pounding. Win or lose, every fight feels like an event. Every walkout like a revolution. And that's what separates the momentary from the monumental. Paddy doesn't just want to win titles. He wants to leave craters, to be remembered, to become folklore. And maybe that's what terrifies the division most. Not his skills, not his submissions, not even his heart, but his inevitability. Because the sport has seen it before. That one fighter who defies logic, who rewrites the rules, who arrives with laughter and leaves with gold. You can't plan for it. You can only witness it. And that's what Paddy's opponents are starting to realize. They're not just fighting a man, they're fighting a movement. So now the question isn't if Paddy will rise to the top, it's when. And when that day comes, when the dust settles and the cage door swings open for the most important walk of his life, what will he be carrying? Not just gloves, not just the hopes of Liverpool, but the weight of expectation, legacy, and every soul who believed in the madness. And maybe, just maybe, that's what he's been training for all along. Because somewhere out there, in the shadows of the division, a new name is being circled. A silent, focused predator, studying tape, dissecting weakness, waiting. And when the contract comes, when the ink dries, and that name lands in Paddy's inbox, it'll be the beginning of a new chapter, one that no one can predict, but everyone will watch. Because when Paddy the Baddy walks in, the fight becomes more than a fight. It becomes a reckoning. And the scariest part, it's still only the beginning.